things we've talked about already today, but hopefully we'll touch on some new topics as well. My name is Kristin. I am a PhD candidate in religious studies here at U.Va. And some of the questions I thought we might put out there to get us started. What have educators and administrators learned about student motivation and success in MOOCs over the past few years? What challenges do instructors face in sustaining student motivation over the duration of an online course? What strategies have been successful? How do students who take MOOCs describe their own experiences and their motivation? How do they describe what keeps them engaged and what doesn't? How do they compare the motivation level they feel while taking a MOOC to what they may have experienced in a traditional classroom? And then we'll leave it to our three panelists to bring in other questions and topics. I'll introduce each of our three panelists briefly, and then I thought we would take about 15 to 20 minutes per panelist with a few remarks by each person, followed by discussion questions from everyone here. So once again, we have Kristin Palmer, the Director of Online Learning Programs here at U.Va, joining us from California. We have Josh Brown. Josh, raise your hand. Director of Research and Assessment for Student Affairs at Liberty University in Lynchburg. In that capacity, he also edits a scholarly journal on higher education called Research and Practice and Assessment. And our third panelist is Ignacio Martinez, right here, PhD candidate in economics here at U.Va, whose research is on economics. So Kristin, if you don't mind, you can hear me, right?
I can hear you.
Okay. Why don't we begin by telling us just a little bit about the history of UVA's involvement with MOOCs and how they work here at the university, and what have been some of the satisfactions and some of the challenges.
Sure. So I think our timeline begins with Dave Evans from computer science, where he was one of the first courses on Udacity, which is a STEM-focused MOOC provider. And then Mike Lennox from our Darden School of Business, who published a MOOC on Udemy, which is a corporate training focused MOOC provider. Both of those were in January, February of 2012, is it possible? 2011? How old are we? Very young. In any case, in June of 2012, there had been a Dean's Offsite for the College of Arts and Sciences, where they were really trying to figure out how to flip the classroom and what tools and technologies and faculty incentives and learning objectives and measurements that they could look at. And one of the conversations was around these new MOOCs as being a way to generate enough funding to try flipping the classroom in a very limited experiment. And then the Darden School of Business, twice a year, they do what they call tech tracks, where they're trying to innovate in their curriculum. And so, for example, last spring they went to Newton, they went to Capital One. They go to all sorts of businesses that are sending their employees to MBA programs or technologies that are doing interesting things with educational content. And so in June of 2012, they were at Coursera as part of the West Coast Tech Track. And so, I guess it's actually May, we are getting requests from the College of Arts and Sciences, as well as the Director of Business, about the Coursera MOOC platform. And we had one professor in the Udemy MOOC platform, and one professor in the Udacity platform. And we had an iTunes U account for the last 8 years. But we do mostly podcasts. So like the talks at the Miller Center and things like that are broadcast and archived. But so the trick of Coursera is they require an institutional contract. And so the College of Arts and Sciences and Darden couldn't experiment with Coursera unless U.Va agreed to sign a contract. So that all happened. They were actually at Coursera the same day that Terry Saldo was sent for resignation.
The same day?
So, yes. So, you know, in retrospect, I have come to realize this is just how Coursera works. That they're very good at closing deals quickly with different universities. And so there have been a lot of press about Terry, and Coursera was saying, we're doing a press announcement, is U.Va in or out? And so I think we signed the contract pretty fast. But every university has signed the contract pretty fast. And it's because it doesn't cost anything. We can put the same resources anywhere else we want. There's no exclusivity. It requires nothing from us. Coursera has no participation in what we offer, the duration. There's no policy about anything that we do at U.Va. And U.Va owns all the intellectual property for the content we create. So there's not a lot of cost to that relationship. It's easy to get in, easy to get out. It will be harder to get out the longer we stay in. But so, starting in June of 2012, we had Udacity, iTunes, and then also Coursera. And we had 6 courses last spring, and we have 6 courses that ran this fall. Our last one opened on Monday. And then we have 6 or 7 scheduled for spring of 2014. And it's been awesome. I mean, we have this pro bono team of really smart, diverse, pan-university contacts, and all these conversations about backwards course design, how to intelligently present material and engage with students. I think it's a ton of work for the faculty, and they have to be able to work on a team. So the TRC has been great on helping with course design. We've had resources from Curry, the engineering school, continuing studies, the School of Medicine. Everybody's been really great at helping with best practice and online pedagogy. And we have a great video team. We went through an RFP and we have 5 different vendors for video. Because we have the recent unpleasantness, as a friend calls it, we decided to go higher quality with our production value. So we spent about $3,000 per final produced hour of content on Coursera. So, for example, Larry Sato, his class is 12 hours. His budget was $30,000. Philip Silico, he has 92 hours of content. He did not spend that much, but he has got a complete course. So there's a big diversity in what we presented. But all of it's been branded to try to be more professional because of the issues that we had around the Board of Visitors and Terry. So I think we've got a lot of interesting stuff going on right now. We're doing a comparison between the learning outcomes from iTunes U versus Coursera. And there are a lot of interesting technologies that are developing. Ignacio was talking about Open edX before this session started. But there's also a platform called NovoEd that they're all about communities of practice. And the course content is an event that's part of the social network. And you're collaborating and creating projects, which is extremely pedagogically sound. That's how people learn. So there's some interesting stuff going on. But it's just me. So I'm U.V.A.'s investment in MOOCs. And I live in California. So I'm happy to talk about it anytime.
What was the very
Well,
last?
we found that, so as far as student retention, for our classes, let me just pull up the spreadsheet. It varies based on the length of the course and the approach, but our retentions based on enrollment. So the number of people that enrolled versus the people that completed, we range from 8% to 23%. And if you look at retention based on the week activity, so people that signed up for the course and then actually showed up sometime in the first 7 days on the course landing page, our retention rates between 90% and 84%.
What was the first number? 90?
19.
19 to 80.
And so the class of ours that has the least retention, based on people that showed up from the first week and actually finished the class, is 19%. And the class with the most retention
I see.
is 84%.
And what are those subjects? What was that class that had only 19% retention?
Well, that class was the longest class that we have. That's a semester-long course. So we find that we have higher retention if it's a shorter subject matter. If we have a 4-week course that is targeted on business topics, that they've already had to complete another MOOC, although we have no way of validating that they actually completed the other one. So we say you have to complete it before you do it. That one has the highest retention rate. But I think generally the shorter courses have higher retention. The basic audience, 75% have degrees. So they're highly, upper middle class, upper class, highly educated, self-motivated, intellectually engaged. And the more that the instructor interacts, the higher the retention. So the minimum is kind of weekly email. So we encourage synchronous office hours, talks, events that are meetups that the faculty go to, that students can come to as well. Participants, not students. They don't have the same proper rights.
So you're saying that when every student enrolled in the course receives an email each week from the instructor, well, I'm assuming it's one email sent to everyone enrolled in the course. When that happens once a week, that helps facilitate retention, as opposed to when the instructor does not reach out like that.
Right, and they're participants, not students,
Participants.
because they don't have the same proper rights.
Questions, comments so far for Kristin? So you were saying that, this surprised me, there were only 6 or 7 courses per semester, MOOCs per semester. I had imagined more actually, so that's interesting. How are those courses selected? How are the...
So it depends. So at the University of Virginia, we don't have a central process for choosing what courses should be in MOOCs, or how they're approved, or how they're funded. It's school-based. So the college had a request for proposal process last spring, and then they had a research stipend, and they had a committee, a faculty committee that reviewed the proposals, and that committee continues to meet. The other school that's doing MOOCs is Darden, and that's been based on the professor's interest and working with the dean to get approved. And then the Curry School of Education, there's a MOOC from the group at Castle, and it's part of their research project. So it's a dean approval.
And since we're particularly interested in this panel in student reception and student responses, can you tell us anything, from the perspective of students' actual words or feedback in their own words about UVA books?
So there are 2 places I go to, and I can quote from that if you want, but Bruce Holsinger, as you said earlier, he put a discussion board, and then he had people post to a site, and so there's a huge chain. But I would argue, and I tried to point this out earlier, one of the dangers of MOOCs on Coursera is Coursera has the relationship with the participant. So 2 days ago, I was taking a tour of Cooper Tower with my dad at the Stanford campus. And I was telling the woman, oh yeah, I do online learning at UVA. And she was like, oh, I'm taking a great Coursera course on Kennedy. And I'm like, that's my course. That's, I spent all of July designing that course. That's us. But she didn't see it as UVA.
Okay.
It was a Coursera course.
Okay.
So I think something that we need to think of as a university, we are very focused on making the residential education phenomenal. Like we're a UNESCO World Heritage Site, we've got all this brilliant faculty, interesting research you can do, the #1 party school. But that's us and trying to figure out how to make that residential education the best we possibly can, and active and engaging and on point and transferable so students can be successful. And what we're doing in MOOCs, it's just an experiment. And there's a little bit of learning about the technology, but there's a lot on how it's impacting our residential students. Like Bruce's class and having these dialogues with the local community. And his students are all marked as community TAs. So they go on the discussion forums and they have a little bit more clout because they work with Bruce, they see him, they can help shape the conversations. And so I think we're not really interested in the student retention on the Coursera side. We're really interested in the learning outcomes and the student experience residentially at UVA. And it's not, with our level of production quality, and Judy Thomas is there, like just clearing the copyrights and the content so it's globally cleared for distribution, it's expensive. And we need to figure out a solution that scales to making our residential student experience active and engaging and transferable. So, I'll stop talking.
Wonderful,
I
yeah.
thought I was going to talk for like 3 minutes.
Thank you very much.
And
Let's take just a minute or two to see if anyone has comments, reactions, questions. Yeah.
I actually was wondering about that last part. Again, I'm not, sorry if this came up already, but as someone who teaches music, I use lots of musical examples while I'm teaching. I assume that this could be highly problematic in terms of copyright. I know fair use, like under 30 seconds, is a thing.
There's no fair use.
No.
That intro professor, that was our skeptic, he said that Coursera was nonprofit. That's not true. Coursera is for-profit. And so there's no fair use in allowing content that was created by someone else to be free and available to everyone on a for-profit platform.
So how expensive is it? Have you tried, say, clearing musical examples, for instance?
Well, generically, we look at $3,000 per final produced hour based on the level of quality we have now. But that includes branding, a lot of camera time with the faculty, a lot of animations and graphics. It's not a screen capture with just a voiceover, and it's not a camera at the back of the classroom. And that would make it much cheaper. But there's still a lot of cost involved to make sure that the content you're distributing, you are allowed to distribute, and that you have sort of the participation and engagement that represents the University of Virginia. So Carol is a great example where she spent a lot of time as a teaching assistant, and sometimes it's working with on-grounds kids. Sometimes it's trying to figure out how to get some data or to change the navigation bar in Coursera.
Kristin, thank you so much. So it's wonderful. Let's pass the microphone, as it were, to Josh Brown. And Josh, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about what you're working on.
Kristin, can you hear me okay? Hey, Kristin?
She just
Yeah,
gave
she's
you a thumbs up.
I can hear you perfect.
Okay, sorry.
I went on mute, so
Okay.
you can't hear me.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. So, my name's Josh. I'll apologize in advance if anything I say is redundant, since I've just joined you this afternoon. So I'm here as the editor of Research and Practice and Assessment. So a year ago this time, next week, I was with the board of editors for our journal, and we were wrestling with the next topic of what would have been the next issue at the time. And MOOCs was on everybody's brain, given that the members of the board range from Stanford and Tulane to William and Mary and UCLA to private educational assessment firms. So we ventured into what at the time, as you heard in Kristin's timeline, was just this this unknown world of a media frenzy. There hadn't been any scholarly, to our knowledge, a scholarly volume that had been produced. So we wet our feet in it. So in January of what year are we in? 13. I approached a variety of individuals asking if we could produce the first volume, full volume on MOOCs. And the purpose for that was that none of this discourse that you saw in the media wasn't new. The themes weren't new. Item response theory isn't new. It's been around, we've been talking about this for 10 years. Calibrated peer review, automated essay scoring, learning outcomes. None of this stuff was new. What was new was the context. So that's where Joseph Schumpeter comes in, and you've got the creative destruction where you end up with a new theory being applied into a context. I invited Kathy Sandine from the American Council of Education to open up with a public policy piece. If you haven't downloaded it, you can go to rpajournal.com. You can get the full issue. It's up on the website. It's in PDF format. She does a phenomenal job. So Kathy, whenever you see that ACE has given their stamp of approval on a MOOC course, that's Kathy. She differentiates between the three providers, Udacity, edX, and Coursera. She does a very good job about telling how those are structured in different ways and the outcomes of those structures. Then I asked Lori Breslow at MIT if she would please follow that up with a piece on real data in MIT's first course, Circuits and Electronics 6.002x. And so a team of MIT and Harvard researchers tackled that. That is the piece that I would highly recommend that you look at with regard to student success and attrition, specifically for this particular topic that we're discussing about, because they do a phenomenal job, and I don't do justice here. I apologize for not having slides, but they track course usage of discussion boards, of videos, of homeworks, of posts, and how those track over the course of 14 weeks. And keep in mind, these are for engineering students, but one of the things they discovered was that surprisingly, 67% of the students, their primary language was English. What they expected was the second would be Chinese. And it wasn't. The next highest ranking was Spanish, which came in at 16%. There were only, out of 154,000 enrollees, only 622 had come from China, which was a complete shock to the research team.
How many, sorry?
154,000. There were only 622 from China.
How much does that have to do with lack of access? Internet control on internet access in China?
No,
We know.
not sure. Kristin, can you speak
So-
to that?
Yeah. So China blocks a lot of the video, or the video is so downgraded. So Coursera partnered with NetEase, which is a vendor in China that hosts the videos so that Chinese consumers can watch it and it won't be blocked. And they've increased 1,000-fold on participation. UVA content is not being done on that platform because it's hosted on that platform. And we have concerns about our IP being hosted on a third-party platform in China. But you're exactly right in saying that it's just blocked.
That's what I imagine. Josh, what else, if you were to summarize, what these MIT researchers learned about student participation from all of this data? Are there a few takeaways?
The big takeaway was that the students who had the ability to access a live human related to that topic wherever they were physically face-to-face had a much better retention and or success rate than others.
So someone that they could go to and talk over what
Yeah,
they
and
had.
basically, yes, and it's anything from, oh my gosh, I don't understand this, to merely just discussing the material itself. And that's delineated.
So they actually did some sort of a survey where they asked students
Yes.
if they had access to a person like
Yes.
that, and then
Yeah, they have a post survey. This was an NSF multi-million-dollar survey or a grant that's supporting this research over the next 2 years.
okay, very interesting. So obviously it would have to be someone who had some sort of knowledge of the topic that the student could confer with.
Knowledge and just discussing,
Just,
yeah. So then that is key. They didn't need to be an expert in circuits and electronics. Yes. Yeah, it's just that discourse.
But it was specifically a person they could talk to face to face.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So the ability to interact with peers online did not determine student retention as much as having a person there.
Correct. Yeah.
So there is some sort of experiment, or this is just a correlation that you see that people who are more likely to complete the course are also more likely to talk with someone?
It's a correlation based on their survey
So
responses.
it's not a causation, it's a
Yeah.
correlation.
Yeah. Third individual is Patrick Meyer. He's over in the Curry School. I asked if he would please do a piece on item response theory and test security. He's got a nice piece there. Steve Balfour at Texas A&M, I asked if he would please review the literature on ADS and CPR, that's automated essay scoring, calibrated peer review. You've got 154,000 students in a course, the homework has to be graded. How do you manage that? How do you scale that? It's done by software. There's two different approaches to that. He does a very nice job in that article delineating how the homework is graded on such a massive scale. And then at the same time, Salman Khan of Khan's Academy had just was about to release his book, and I needed somebody to have a discourse with him. And so I asked Kate Stimson, the former president of the MLA, she's at NYU, if she would please have a dialogue with Mr. Khan. And she did a phenomenal review of his book, which I would also highly encourage you to take a look at. That's a summary of the issue. Again, you can download it. For those of you that do research on MOOCs, I think it's an invaluable asset for you. The other thing that happened that following, later that month, was another full issue came out, which is by the Journal of Online Learning and Teaching, JOLT. If you haven't downloaded that, I would also recommend that you go there. This one is critical because of its Canadian and European influence. It's critical because it's here where you learn the difference between a CMOOC and an XMOOC. And if you haven't been talking about this, this is critical because when you read, even in Kathy Sandin's piece, when she does her policy piece in RPA, the tendency is to say, oh, MOOCs have this collectivist background. You know, they started in Canada in 2008, and then you immediately jump to Coursera, Andrew and Daphne. And there's a big chunk of time there that's really important. The connectivist, the CMOOCs is a connectivist MOOC. Those specifically emphasize content creation and relationships. I'll give you a couple as one. There's a piece in here that you really do need to read if you're in behavioral sciences or humanities fields. It's by Bonnie Stewart in the Journal of Online Learning and Teaching issue. But some of the differences that she makes between the CMOOC and the XMOOC. The CMOOC is distributed. The XMOOC has a centralized expert. The CMOOC is collective intelligence. The XMOOC emphasizes individual intelligence. The CMOOC emphasizes collaborative or authorship. The XMOOC emphasizes individual authorship. And I'll continue sharing versus ownership, relationship versus information broadcast. In the CMOOC, social media takes a high presence beyond just the discussion boards in the XMOOCs. But basically what had happened was is that the prestigious universities and the venture capital collided with the CMOOC and has transformed the meaning. So that when you see the term MOOC now, it is completely different than what it was prior to 2011. And so there's a big difference there in how you talk about it. And it's only when you start to read the Canadian journals where this discourse originated that you really get to pick up on the CMOOC emphasis as opposed to the American model. So that's critically important. In the interest of time, so I'll just make one last point of emphasis here. I wanted to make sure that how we were operationalizing our terms was important. The first term I wanted to make sure that we were operationalizing was MOOC. And then the second term that I find important is success. what do we mean by success? In the MIT piece, as they grappled with how do we measure success, one way they tackled that was achievement. And that was simply the grade, the outcome. Did they finish? 154,000 enrolled. By the first problem set, 23,000 students were left. By midterm, 10,000 students had completed the midterm, and 8,000 students took the final. 7,000 students, 7,100 roughly received the certificate. So what they were concerned with in the second point of success was retention or persistence. And so that's how in the article you'll continue to see what they call our stop outs. Where in the world is a student stopping out? So you've got success as achievement, success as retention, and then the third, which is success as engagement. So if you think about just a traditional course, I've got a variety of levels or a variety of ways that I can be engaged. One is I can decide simply to show up to class as opposed to sleeping. Second is I'm in class versus I'm really sort of just nodding off. I may choose to raise my hand and ask the professor to clarify versus not participating at all. And then a deeper level of engagement is I may actually have a discourse with the professor in some way, shape, or form. Translate that to the online environment, you end up with people who are actively involved, lurking, and passively involved. Are the three categories that you'll find in the JOLT issue. So they offer some conceptual frameworks there. So I'll end with that. I've given you two great issues, two volumes that I think you need to engage, or would encourage you to engage. And then as you move forward in your own research and or thinking,